Elena never expected that a simple envelope could change her life. It arrived on a rainy evening, slipped under her apartment door while she was practicing the same piano piece for the 100th time. The sound of the rain mixed with her hesitant notes, and when she bent to pick up the envelope, a drop of water blurred the golden letters on the front. It said only, "An invitation to perform." Her heart beat a little faster. No one had invited her to play anywhere in years. She had stopped performing publicly after her mother's illness and the financial troubles that followed. Still, she tore open the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside, on heavy cream paper, was a neatly typed letter. "You are cordially invited to perform at an exclusive private gathering hosted by Mr. Ashford at the Ashford estate this Saturday evening. Dress formally. Transportation will be arranged. Compensation will be generous." There was no mention of why she had been chosen. No one signed the letter. Just a small logo embossed in gold, an elegant A. Elena had heard the name Ashford before. Everyone in town knew him. A millionaire businessman who loved to flaunt his wealth and throw lavish parties for his circle of elite friends. He owned half the properties in the city and was known for his arrogance as much as his charm. At first, Elena thought it was a mistake. Maybe they meant to invite someone else, a real concert pianist, not a struggling teacher who gave lessons to children in a tiny studio. She almost threw the letter away, but something about it made her stop. She read it again and again. Then she remembered. Years ago, when she had been a student performing at a charity gala, a young man had approached her afterward, confident, wealthy-looking, and far too sure of himself. He had called her a rare talent in need of guidance. She had politely declined his offer to mentor her. That man's name? Alexander Ashford. Now a chill ran down her spine. Could it be the same man? Was this his doing? Still, curiosity overpowered doubt. If it was him, why would he invite her after all these years? She told herself it was just a coincidence. She needed the money. Rent was due. Her piano needed tuning. And a performance, even if small, might open new doors. By Saturday, she had convinced herself it would be fine. She wore her best black dress, when simple but elegant, and tied her hair neatly. When the car arrived, a sleek black limousine, she hesitated before getting in. The driver didn't say much, just nodded when she asked Ashford Estate. The city lights faded behind her as the car rolled into the countryside. Trees lined the long road, and soon through the mist a mansion appeared, enormous, glowing under golden lights. The air smelled of roses and expensive perfume. Inside, chandeliers hung like frozen stars. People in tuxedos and gowns filled the hall, laughing, sipping champagne, their voices blending into a hum of wealth and gossip. Elena felt out of place instantly. She clutched her small bag tighter, trying not to stare. The servants moved gracefully, offering drinks on silver trays. No one seemed to notice her, until someone did. A tall man turned from a group of guests and smiled. His smile was sharp, confident, and familiar. "Miss Elena," he said smoothly. "It's been a long time." Her breath caught. It was him, Alexander Ashford. He looked older, richer, but that same glint of amusement was still in his eyes, the one she remembered from years ago, when she had walked away from his arrogant compliments. "You remember me," he said, clearly pleased. "I'm honored," she nodded stiffly. "You invited me to play?" "Of course. I've been following your humble career. I thought it would be interesting to see you perform again, for my guests." Something in his tone made her uneasy. The way he said humble sounded like an insult wrapped in politeness. Still, she forced a smile. "Thank you for the opportunity." He leaned closer. "Don't thank me yet." Elena's heart pounded. The guest's laughter behind him felt suddenly sharp, almost mocking. She realized, too late, that this wasn't an invitation. It was a stage set for something else. A servant led her toward a grand piano near the center of the room, a beautiful black Steinway shining under crystal lights. Around it, a semicircle of guests waited, curious and amused. "She's the pianist?" one woman whispered, loud enough for Elena to hear. "She looks like the help," another man chuckled. "Perhaps that's the point." Elena pretended not to notice. Her hands were cold. The air felt heavy, as though everyone was waiting for her to embarrass herself. Alexander clinked his glass and raised his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I have a special treat for you. A personal performance by an old acquaintance of mine, Miss Elena. A pianist of Simple origins, but remarkable courage. The guests laughed softly. Elena's stomach turned. Now she understood. This wasn't admiration. It was entertainment, but she couldn't walk away. Not yet. So she sat at the piano. The seat felt strange beneath her. Her reflection stared back from the polished surface. Pale, nervous, but determined. Her fingers brushed the keys. The laughter behind her faded slightly. She took a deep breath. In that moment, surrounded by people waiting to see her fail, Elena made a quiet promise to herself. If they wanted a show, they would get one. She would play, not for them, not for the man who wanted to humiliate her, but for every moment she had ever been underestimated, ignored, or dismissed. And as the first note echoed through the grand hall, she didn't see the millionaire's smirk or the audience's laughter anymore. She saw only the music, and the power it still gave her. Elena's music filled the great hall like a storm and a whisper at once. Every note came from a place deep inside her, pain, pride, defiance. The crowd that had been laughing before now stood in silence as if afraid to breathe. When the final chord faded, there was no sound, not even a clap at first. Then slowly someone started applauding, then another. Within seconds the room exploded with applause. The same people who had smirked now looked at her with shining eyes, whispering to one another in disbelief. Elena stood from the piano, her chest rising and falling. She bowed slightly, her hands still trembling from the intensity of what she'd played. For a brief moment she felt free. She had turned humiliation into triumph. But then she looked up and saw him. Alexander Ashford stood near the staircase, a glass of wine in his hand, watching her with a faint, unreadable smile. He wasn't clapping. He didn't look impressed. He looked amused. "Remarkable," he said finally, his voice cutting through the noise. "Truly remarkable." People turned toward him, eager to follow his lead. He raised his glass. To unexpected talent. The crowd cheered again, but there was something in his tone. Something cold and mocking that only Elena seemed to hear. She forced a smile. "Thank you, Mr. Ashford." He stepped closer, his expensive shoes silent against the marble floor. "You've improved since the last time I saw you. I almost believed every note." Elena frowned slightly. "Almost?" He tilted his head, pretending to think. "Yes, you play beautifully, but it's still missing something. Real emotion, maybe?" Her breath caught. "I gave it everything I had." "Oh, I'm sure you did," he said lightly, sipping his wine. "But passion doesn't always come from effort, does it? Sometimes it comes from pain. Real pain." He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You rejected me once, remember? Back when you thought you were too good for me. I see life's been humbling." Elena froze. His words hit like ice. So that was it. This wasn't about music. This was about revenge. He wanted to humiliate her because she once bruised his pride. The realization made her chest tighten, but she said nothing. The guests continued talking, laughing, drinking, unaware of the sharp tension between them. Alexander smiled wider. "I do enjoy a good performance, Elena. But tell me, how does it feel to play for those who never took you seriously?" She met his eyes. "It feels like freedom." His smile faltered just slightly. "Freedom?" "Yes," she said quietly. "Because I didn't play for them. Or for you. I played for myself." For a moment, the air between them grew heavy. His jaw clenched. Then he laughed softly, still defiant. "I see some things never change." He turned away before she could respond. "Enjoy the rest of the evening, Miss Elena. I'll send your payment." She watched him disappear into the crowd, feeling the applause fade behind her. Everyone returned to their wine and chatter as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But inside, Elena's thoughts were racing. Why had he invited her? Just to make her feel small again? To prove that no matter what she did, she'd always be beneath him? As the night went on, she noticed small things she hadn't before. Some guests whispered when she passed. Others gave her sympathetic smiles. One woman wearing too many diamonds said loudly, "It's kind of cruel, really. But I suppose he enjoys his little games." Games, Elena understood then. Alexander had not invited her as a musician. He had invited her as a pawn. He wanted to see if she would break. And even though she hadn't, he still had control. He had bought her presence, her performance, her silence. When she finally stepped outside, the cool night air felt like relief. The stars above were faint behind the city lights, but she stared up anyway. needing something pure to look at. The limousine waited quietly at the gate. As she got in, she noticed a small envelope on the seat beside her. Her name was written on it in gold ink, just like before. Inside was a thick stack of money and a note in his elegant handwriting. "You played beautifully. But remember, everything has a price. AA." She crumpled the note in her hand, her eyes burning. The car moved silently down the long road back to the city, but her mind wouldn't rest. The memory of his smirk replayed again and again. He wanted her to feel powerless, to think that no matter how strong she was, he could always pull the strings, but he was wrong. She looked at her reflection in the car window, tired, proud, and angry. "This isn't over," she whispered to herself. She didn't know what she would do yet, but she knew one thing for sure. Alexander Ashford had started a game she didn't plan on losing. The next morning, she sat at her old piano again, her fingers hovering above the keys. The apartment was quiet except for the soft creaks of the floor and the sound of her own breathing. She played the same melody she had performed the night before. But this time, it sounded different, stronger, sharper. Every note was a promise. He thought he had humiliated her, but all he had done was reignite the fire she had almost lost. Her music, once a burden, was now her weapon. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she could almost hear his words again. "Real emotion comes from pain." Fine. Then pain was exactly what she would give him. Turned into something beautiful, something unstoppable. Elena smiled faintly as her fingers danced across the keys. The echo of the notes filled her tiny apartment like sunlight through a storm. The hidden motive had been his, but soon he would learn that she had one too. Days passed after the performance at Ashford Estate, but Elena couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. His words stayed in her head like a stain. Everything has a price. She went back to her routine, teaching children how to play the piano in her small rented studio, fixing broken sheet stands, drinking instant coffee to stay awake. But inside she was restless. Every time she pressed a key, she remembered the smirk on Alexander's face. He hadn't invited her for music. He'd done it to remind her who held the power. Still, she didn't crumble. If anything, she played harder, fiercer, better. Her students noticed it. Even the parents whispered that she had something different in her sound lately, something raw and alive. Then one evening, as she was closing up the studio, her phone rang. The number was unknown. "Elena?" a familiar smooth voice said. She froze. "Mr. Ashford?" "I hope I'm not calling it a bad time," he said politely, though his tone already suggested that he didn't care if it was. "I wanted to thank you again for the other night. My guests are still talking about your performance." "I'm glad they enjoyed it," she replied stiffly. "Oh, they did," he said with a hint of laughter. "In fact, I'd like to invite you again. Another gathering, slightly larger this time. It's a charity gala. Very prestigious crowd. You'll be well compensated, of course." Elena hesitated. Every instinct told her to refuse. But something else, pride perhaps, made her say yes. "Fine," she said quietly. "Send me the details." "Splendid," he replied. "And Elena, wear something elegant this time. The audience expects class." The line went dead. Saturday arrived faster than she expected. She borrowed a long black gown from a neighbor, one that shimmered slightly under the light. It wasn't new, but it made her feel confident. When the limousine came again, she climbed in silently, her heart a mix of nerves and fire. This time, the mansion was even more crowded. Journalists with cameras stood near the red carpet entrance, snapping photos of politicians, actors, and wealthy businessmen. The chandeliers glowed brighter, the laughter louder. Inside, Alexander greeted her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, Miss Elena, beautiful as always." She nodded politely. "Where should I perform?" He pointed to a raised stage in the center of the room, where a glossy black piano stood under the spotlight. Around it, hundreds of guests mingled with glasses of champagne. "You'll play after dinner," he said. A small surprise for everyone. Elena took a deep breath. She had been on stages before, big and small, but never one that felt like this. Something in her gut told her that this wasn't just a performance. It was another test. As dinner ended, Alexander clinked his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with his charming voice. "Before we begin tonight's auction, I have prepared a special treat, a live performance from a talented pianist I had the honor of discovering." The word discovering made her skin crawl. He continued, "She's a self-taught artist, a woman of humble beginnings. I thought it might inspire us all to see how far determination can take even the most ordinary among us." A soft ripple of laughter moved through the audience. Elena's throat tightened. She saw the condescending smiles, the curious glances. They weren't expecting to be moved. They were expecting to be entertained. She walked to the piano, keeping her chin high. Her hands were steady, though her heart raced. As she sat down, she could feel Alexander's gaze burning from somewhere behind her. "Play something lively, dear," someone called out. "We've had too much wine to cry." More laughter followed. Elena closed her eyes. She could walk away. She could leave right now and never look back. But no, not this time. She let her fingers fall onto the keys. The first notes came softly, delicate, uncertain, like a whisper trying to be heard over the noise. The guests barely noticed at first. Then the melody deepened, twisting into something powerful and haunting. The laughter died. The clinking glasses stopped. Her music turned the air thick with emotion, sorrow, hope, and fire all mixed together. Every note was a confession, every chord a story. The sound filled the room until it felt like time itself had paused. People leaned forward. Some even closed their eyes. And Alexander, the man who had invited her to humiliate her, stood completely still, his expression unreadable. When the last note faded, the silence was so heavy it almost hurt. Then came the applause, thunderous, uncontrollable, endless. People stood cheering, calling her name. Cameras flashed, but Elena didn't look at them. She looked only at him. Alexander's smile was gone. For once, he looked unsure, almost shaken. He stepped forward, trying to recover. "A truly passionate performance," he said, his voice uneven. Who would have thought? Elena rose gracefully. "You did," she said softly. "After all, you told me passion comes from pain." He froze. The crowd murmured, sensing tension but not understanding its depth. Elena bowed slightly and left the stage. Her heart felt light, her step steady. The humiliation he had planned for her had turned against him. Outside, the night was quiet again. She walked past the glowing fountain, her reflection rippling in the water. The applause still echoed in her ears, not as a sound but as a feeling. She smiled to herself. He had wanted her to play to shame her. Instead, her music had made her unforgettable. And for the first time in a long while, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in years: victory. But she didn't know that Alexander Ashford wasn't finished yet. He was a man who hated to lose. And in his world, humiliation demanded revenge. The night after the gala, Elena couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed every moment, and the laughter, the silence, the applause. The music still echoed in her chest like a heartbeat that refused to calm down. She had done it again, turned humiliation into beauty. But something in her knew this wasn't the end. Alexander Ashford wasn't the kind of man who accepted defeat quietly, and she was right. A week later, she received another invitation. No envelope this time, just a sleek black card delivered by hand. It read, "Final performance, Saturday 8 p.m., Ashford Estate. One last chance to prove what you truly are." No signature. Just the gold A. Elena stared at it for a long time. Every part of her said not to go. She owed him nothing. But there was something inside her, a spark, a defiance that whispered, "Go anyway." This time she wasn't going as his victim. She was going as herself. Saturday came with heavy clouds. The sky looked bruised, like it knew a storm was waiting. Elena wore a white dress, simple, flowing, pure, as if to defy the dark mood. She tied her hair back, not for beauty, but for focus. When the limousine arrived, she didn't hesitate. She climbed in silently, her face calm but her mind burning. The ride was quiet except for the hum of the engine. She didn't look out the window. Instead, she rested her hands on her lap, feeling the faint tremor in her fingers, the same fingers that had carried her through every trial in life. When she arrived, the mansion was quieter than before. No crowd, no laughter, no lights from chandeliers, only a few cars parked outside and the faint sound of rain hitting the marble steps. A butler opened the door, his expression unreadable. Mr. Ashford is expecting you." Inside, the grand hall was dimly lit. The chandeliers were half off, their golden glow replaced by candlelight. The piano sat alone under a single spotlight, like a stage waiting for judgment. And there he was, Alexander Ashford, sitting on a leather chair beside the piano, his posture perfect, his eyes sharp as ever. "Elena," he said softly, "you came." "I said I would," she replied. He smiled faintly. "You know, most people would refuse after what happened last time, but not you. You're stubborn." "I'm determined," she said. "Same thing." He stood, walking toward her. "Tonight isn't a gala or a game," he said. "No audience. No applause, just you. And me," Elena frowned. "Why?" "Because," he said, circling her slowly like a hunter studying his prey. "I need to understand," studying his prey. "I need to understand how you do it, how you make people feel what they don't want to feel. When you played that night, I saw things in their faces I hadn't seen in years, in her fear, regret, pain." He paused in front of her. "I hate that kind of power. I want to see it again. But this time, for me." Elena's heartbeat quickened. "You invited me to perform and for you alone?" "Yes," he said. "Consider it a challenge. Play for me. No crowd, no safety. Just truth. If your music is really as powerful as you think, prove it." She stared at him. "And if I refuse," he smiled, "then you'll always wonder if you could have made me feel something." His words struck her like a dare. She wanted to turn and leave, to tell him he wasn't worth her music. But deep inside, she wanted to play. Not for his approval, but to show him that her soul wasn't something he could own. So she walked to the piano and sat down. The keys gleamed under the light, smooth and cold. Her reflection looked back at her from the glossy surface, a woman who had been broken, mocked and challenged, yet somehow still standing. She took a deep breath. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken tension. The storm outside cracked softly, thunder rumbling like a distant drum. Alexander poured himself a drink and sat back, watching her. "Go ahead," he said quietly. "Play." Elena closed her eyes. For a moment, everything faded. The mansion, the candles, even the man who had tried to control her. In her mind, she saw her mother sitting by the window, listening to her practice as a little girl. She saw her small apartment, the worn-out keys of her old piano, the faces of the children she taught every day. Every memory, every loss, every bit of love she had ever felt gathered inside her chest like a growing storm. Her fingers touched the keys. The first note rang out, soft, trembling, and she felt it pulse through her body like a heartbeat. The next few came slower, deeper, until the melody began to take shape. Sorrow woven with strength, loneliness filled with light. Alexander said nothing, but his eyes followed every movement. His usual calm expression was slipping piece by piece. The music grew louder, more powerful. It wasn't polished or perfect, it was real. It was the sound of her life, fragile, fierce, and completely hers. Tears burned in her eyes, but she didn't stop. She played until the sound filled every corner of the mansion, echoing off marble and memory alike, and then silence. Her hands dropped from the keys. The air hung heavy, trembling. Alexander's glass sat untouched beside him. His face was pale, his jaw tight. For once, the man who always had something clever to say said nothing. Elena stood slowly. Her voice was soft but steady. "You wanted to feel something. Now you have." He looked up at her, speechless. She turned and began to walk toward the door, her footsteps echoing in the hollow silence. Behind her, his voice finally came, low, shaken, almost human. "Elena." But she didn't stop. For the first time in her life, she didn't need applause. The moment before the music had been hers, and so was everything after. When Elena walked out of Ashford Estate that night, she didn't look back. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like thunder and smoke. Her shoes were soaked. Her dress clung to her skin. But she didn't care. For the first time in years, she felt light. Not because she had won something, but because she had let go. That night, she hadn't played for fame, money, or revenge. She had played for truth, her truth. And for a few minutes she had seen it in Alexander's eyes. Shock, emotion, maybe even pain. He had felt something real, something he couldn't control, and that was her victory. The days that followed were strangely calm. She returned to her small studio, taught her students, cleaned the piano, and tried to forget. But people didn't let her. Someone had filmed her last gala performance and posted it online. Within days, it went viral. The video had millions of views. People called her the unknown pianist who made the rich cry. At first, she didn't believe it. Then her phone started ringing nonstop. Journalists, producers, musicians, everyone wanted to talk to her. She became the symbol of something beautiful and unexpected. Art rising from pain. Her students' parents beamed with pride. Strangers sent her letters saying her music had healed them. Concert invitations began arriving one after another. Elena was overwhelmed. For years, she had begged for a chance to be seen. Now the world couldn't stop looking. But fame came with a strange silence, too. Every interview asked about her mystery benefactor, the man who had invited her. She never mentioned Alexander's name. Not once. He had tried to humiliate her, and she had turned it into glory. That was enough. She didn't owe him recognition. Still, he lingered in her thoughts like a shadow. One evening, as she practiced in her studio, she noticed a letter on the piano stool. No envelope this time, just a folded piece of paper. You've become quite the sensation, congratulations, but don't forget. It all started with me. Her heart tightened. He was watching. Again. But instead of fear, she felt something else. Pity. He still didn't understand. It hadn't started with him. It had started the day she first touched a piano. The day her mother taught her that music wasn't about money or power, but about truth. She smiled faintly, tore the letter in half, and dropped it into the trash. Weeks turned into months. Elena's performances grew bigger. Grander theaters, brighter lights, and fuller crowds. Yet every time she sat at a piano, she played as if she were still in that quiet mansion, under candlelight, facing her pain alone. Her playing changed, too. It wasn't just skill anymore, and it was emotion, raw and pure. Critics called it otherworldly, transformative, divine. But to her, it was simply honest. Each performance felt like a piece of her soul being set free. Her transformation wasn't in the fame or applause. It was in how she saw herself now. She wasn't the frightened girl trying to survive humiliation. She was the woman who could turn cruelty into art. Then one night, after a sold-out concert, she saw him again. Alexander Ashford stood near the exit, dressed in his usual perfection. Black suit, calm expression, eyes that hid too much. For a moment, the crowd disappeared. The lights dimmed. It was just the two of them again. He approached her slowly, almost carefully. "You've done well," he said softly. "Have I?" She replied, her voice steady. He nodded. "Better than I expected." There was no arrogance in his tone this time, no mockery. Only a strange weariness. "I came tonight to understand what I couldn't before," he said. "How you make people feel so much." Elena studied him. "And did you?" He smiled faintly. "Yes, for the first time I listened." She didn't know if he meant the music or her silence. He took a step closer. "You changed me, Elena." She shook her head gently. "No, I didn't change you. The music did. You just finally heard it." For a moment, he said nothing. His eyes softened, almost sad. "You were right that night," he whispered. "Pain does create emotion, but yours turned it into beauty. I only ever turned mine into cruelty." Elena looked at him quietly. There was nothing left to forgive, nothing left to prove. "You can change that," she said. He smiled weakly. "Maybe it's too late." "It never is." Then she turned away, walking toward the stage doors. The sound of her heels echoed softly, each step a reminder of who she had become. Behind her, Alexander stood alone in the empty hallway, surrounded by silence, and the same silence she had once feared, but now, it was his turn to listen. When Elena stepped outside, the night air was crisp and bright. The city lights sparkled like piano keys, endless and alive. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel small beneath them. She didn't feel invisible or trapped by her past. She had transformed, not into someone new, but into who she was always meant to be. Her scars had turned into symphonies. Her pain had become her power. And her music, the same music that once saved her, now saved others too. Elena smiled as she walked toward the waiting car. Her manager rushed to tell her about another big offer, an international tour, the chance of a lifetime. She listened, but her eyes drifted upward, toward the sky. She thought of the mansion, the humiliation, the loneliness, and the sound of the piano under her trembling hands. All of it. Every dark moment had been part of this transformation, because sometimes the only way to find light is to play through the darkness. After the concert that night, Elena sat alone in her dressing room. The applause had faded hours ago, yet its echo still lingered inside her chest. It was strange, she thought, how silence could feel louder than any crowd. The mirror in front of her reflected a face she almost didn't recognize. Calm eyes, steady breath, a quiet smile. The young girl who once trembled before a piano had grown into a woman who could face a world that had once laughed at her. But in the stillness, she also felt something else, an ache she couldn't name. For months now, she had been living in a whirlwind. Interviews, cameras, tours, endless questions about the mystery of her passion. Everyone wanted to know where her pain came from, but no one really wanted to hear the story behind it. They loved her music, but not the truth that shaped it. She leaned back, closing her eyes. In her mind, she saw that candle-lit room again, the grand piano, the storm outside, and Alexander Ashford sitting silently after her final note. That moment had changed them both, though in different ways. He had tried to own her humiliation, but ended up confronting his own emptiness instead. She had walked away free, but part of her had left a piece of herself in that music, in that night. A soft knock broke the silence. A soft knock broke the silence. Her music had changed again, softer, freer, no longer heavy with pain. It carried warmth now, as though every note had found a home. But one morning, as she sat by the piano, she caught her reflection in the mirror beside it. And something struck her. For so long, her entire life had been about reactions, to loss, to humiliation, to pain. Her success, her strength, her identity, all had grown from the things she had survived. She had turned darkness into beauty, yes, but was she still letting it define her? She touched the piano keys gently and whispered to herself, "It's time to live, not just heal." That realization settled deep in her heart like a quiet truth she had always known but never said aloud. Later that week, Elena received a letter, handwritten, sealed in black wax. The handwriting was neat and familiar. For a moment she hesitated. She thought she had left that part of her story behind. Still, she opened it. "Elena, I've been listening to your new recordings. You no longer play with anger and only light. I envy that. I've sold my estate. I'm leaving the country for a while. Somewhere far, quiet and nameless. I wanted to say thank you. You may not believe it, but your music changed me. Alexander." She read it twice, her fingers trembling slightly. Then she folded it neatly and placed it in the small wooden box where she kept her mother's old music sheets. There was no anger left, no bitterness, no revenge. Just understanding. For years she had believed that he was her story's villain. But now she saw the truth. He had only been a mirror reflecting her struggle to reclaim her worth. And once she found it, his power vanished. He was not her ending. He was her beginning. That night, Elena went to the old concert hall, the same one where she had played her first real performance years ago. It was empty now, the seats covered in dust sheets, the stage silent. She walked across the wooden floor, her heels echoing softly in the hollow room. The piano was still there, old, slightly out of tune, but beautiful. She sat down and ran her hand over the keys, feeling their cold smoothness. This was where she had first dreamed of greatness, before life had broken her, before pain had taught her strength. And now, she was here again. Not as the same woman, but as the one who had learned that greatness wasn't about being seen. It was about being whole. She began to play. No audience, no cameras, no chandeliers, just her and the sound of her own heart spilling through the music. The melody was slow, tender, filled with nostalgia. It told a story of falling and rising, of losing and finding, of loving even what had hurt her. As she played, she realized something. Her journey had never been about the millionaire. It had never been about revenge, pride, or even proving herself. It was about reclaiming the part of her that believed, the part that could still create beauty after being shattered. Tears filled her eyes, but this time, they weren't from sadness. They were from gratitude. When the final note faded, she sat in silence for a long while. Then she whispered, almost like a prayer, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, not to Alexander, not to the world, but to life itself. For breaking her, for shaping her, for giving her something to say through her music. The hall stayed quiet, but the silence was warm, not empty. It felt like the walls themselves were listening. Weeks later, she decided to take a break from performing. The world thought she was crazy. Her fame was at its peak, but Elena smiled and said, "Even music needs rest between notes." She moved to a small coastal town, peaceful, full of sunlight and sea breeze. There she taught local children and played for the waves at sunset. No stage, no spotlight, just the sound of the ocean blending with her piano. She no longer played to heal. She played to live. Sometimes she still thought of Alexander, not with hatred or longing, but with quiet compassion. She hoped he had found his peace wherever he was, because now she had found hers. One evening, as the sky turned gold and pink, one of her young students asked, "Miss Elena, why do you always smile when you play?" She paused, then said softly, "Because once I forgot how to, and the music helped me remember." The child nodded as if they understood. Elena looked out at the horizon, the waves catching the light like 1,000 tiny stars. For the first time in her life, she didn't need to look back. Everything she had been through had led her here, to this peace, this simplicity, this truth. Her realization was clear and complete. Her music had never been about sound. It had always been about freedom, the kind that comes when you stop playing for others and start playing for yourself. As the evening breeze danced through her hair, Elena began to play again, a soft tune full of life and hope. And as the last light of the day kissed the sea, she smiled to herself. She wasn't the girl who had been humiliated anymore. She wasn't even the woman who had conquered pain. She was something greater, whole, unshaken, and free. And in that gentle, golden silence after her song, Elena finally understood. The real victory wasn't in making the world listen. It was in finding peace with her own voice. Years later, Elena's name had become more than a name. It had become a story whispered across concert halls, classrooms, and quiet living rooms. People spoke of her not just as a pianist, but as a symbol of resilience, of beauty rising from humiliation, of truth stronger than pride. But Elena never thought of herself that way. To her, she was still the girl who once sat in a small apartment, practicing on a worn-out piano with chipped keys and dreams that seemed too far away. Her fame had settled into something softer now, not noisy, not glittering, but calm and lasting, like music that lingers long after the song ends. One morning, she stood backstage at a grand music academy, her own. After years of touring, Elena had used her savings to build a school for children who loved music but couldn't afford lessons. She called it the Resonance Institute, because music, she said, should echo beyond the person who plays it. The building was filled with laughter, piano notes, and the gentle chaos of learning. She watched as her students practiced in small rooms, some timid, some bold, each discovering their own sound. One boy, no older than 10, stumbled through a difficult passage and groaned in frustration. Elena walked over, kneeling beside him. "Don't fight the piano," she said gently. "Let it speak with you, not against you," he frowned. "But I keep making mistakes," she smiled. "So did I. Every mistake is a note that's trying to find its place." The boy looked at her curiously. "Did you ever mess up in front of people?" Elena laughed softly, the sound full of memory. "Once," she said. "A long time ago, in a room full of people who wanted me to fail." "What happened?" he asked, eyes wide. "I played anyway," she said, smiling. "And I didn't fail. I just changed the way the story sounded." That afternoon, Elena sat in her office, sunlight streaming through the tall windows. On her desk was a letter, yellowed and creased from years of keeping. It was Alexander's last note, the one she had once hidden in her music box. She unfolded it carefully. She hadn't read it in years. "You no longer play with anger, only light." "I envy that," her eyes softened. Wherever he was, she hoped he had found the same peace. She no longer hated him. In fact, she was strangely thankful. Without his cruelty, she might never have discovered the strength to transform it. Life had a way of turning even the sharpest pain into something meaningful, if you let it. As the sun dipped low, Elena prepared for the school's opening concert. The students had begged her to play the final piece of the evening, just one song from the heart. The auditorium filled with parents, friends, and strangers. The air buzzed with excitement. When she stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. She looked out and saw faces full of wonder, not judgment, not mockery, just hope. Her hands rested on the piano keys. She took a slow breath, the same way she used to before every performance. Then she began to play. The melody was new, gentle and radiant, woven with everything she had learned and felt through the years. It carried the sweetness of forgiveness, the ache of memory, the joy of freedom. The music rose like light through an open window, touching everyone in the hall. Some smiled. Some cried. Even the youngest children sat still, listening. And when the final note faded, a warm silence followed. The same silence that had once frightened her but now felt like home. She looked up, her heart full. This was her legacy. Not the fame, not the money, but the moments when her music reached someone's soul and reminded them that they too could rise. After the concert, one of her older students approached shyly. "Miss Elena," she said, "how do you always play like the music belongs to you? Play like the music belongs to you." Elena smiled, her eyes shining. "Because it does," she said softly. "But it also belongs to you, to everyone who listens, and everyone who dares to feel." The girl nodded, as if tucking the words away in her heart. That night, when everyone had gone, Elena walked through the quiet halls of her academy. The echoes of laughter and music still floated faintly in the air. She stopped by one of the practice rooms where a small upright piano stood under the moonlight. She sat down, letting her fingers drift across the keys. This time she didn't play for revenge or recognition or healing. She played because it was who she was. Each note shimmered softly, fading into the still night. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and somewhere, the faint sound of waves could be heard. Elena smiled, her heart full, her journey, from humiliation to triumph, from pain to peace, and had become a song of its own, passed down not through fame, but through feeling. And as she played her final melody for the night, she whispered to herself, "They wanted to humiliate me, but my music didn't just leave them speechless, it left them changed." The last chord lingered in the air, warm and endless. And in that perfect sacred silence, Elena knew her story had found its forever home. Not in applause, not in memory, but in every heart her music would ever touch.